I would like to diagnose Oliver Queen, who is, of course, the character who is Green Arrow. He's in his late 20s to early 30s throughout the duration of the show, and there are several versions of this story, including comics, movies, TV shows, and such. But the one I want to choose to focus on is CW's version, titled Arrow. The premise of the story is that Oliver Queen is the son of a very ridiculously wealthy businessman, and they take a boat trip, and storm comes, and it crashes, and his father ends up dying, and he ends up on an island. One of my favorite things about this show is actually how it's laid out, and it's, going back between him returning home after 5 years on an island and him having flashbacks to the island that usually line up. Back home, he leads a life of vigilantism, and he's got a web of friends and enemies, some of which include Tommy Merlin and Laurel Lance, who he had before. He has his family, his father, mother, sister, and stepfather, and then, of course, new friends such as John Diggle, Felicity Smoker, Roy Harper. Oliver Queen's painful and difficult story has PTSD written all over it. Post-traumatic stress disorder is a trauma and stressor-related disorder, and this category of disorders has intense reactions to traumatic or stressful events. There are three major requirements for the diagnosis of PTSD, and the first is that you have to have direct or indirect exposure to some amount of, serious or threatened death or sexual violence or serious injury. And Oliver Queen endures loads of all of this, some of which is capturing, torture, getting beat, very close to death. The second is that he needs to have two symptoms involving thoughts or emotions, two symptoms involving intrusive memories, which is a big one as well. And this is one of the ones that I feel like the way the show is laid out, it shows this best, is where it shows him, thinking back to traumatic experiences on the island, as well as how that's sticking with him in his current life that he's trying to lead. These symptoms need to be present for at least a month, and they definitely are. They're present for really the first year is where it's strongest, and then you kind of see him start recovering, which I think is a huge benefit, of course. Like, you want people to recover from this kind of stuff, but it stays with him and is very difficult for him to get rid of. In the multi-path model, I decided on the four things. In the biological dimension, I did decide it's a little bit difficult to factually state things about this, just because he is a fictional character. It's hard to, read into genetics and medical history and whether someone's really more prone to PTSD or not. But because of the sheer number of times, he was abused physically and put close to death, it definitely increases his chances no matter what. The psychological dimension, and this is where Oliver was most at risk, is where he witnesses people close to him getting killed or hurt, when he himself is very close to it, and just has a very unpleasant 5 years, plus everything else that he endures in the next seven seasons of the show. In the social dimension, there's kind of two aspects to this. The first is that he really cuts himself off from other people, and that's a lot on him. But there's not a lot of people that can relate to what he's gone through, and that makes it very difficult for him to connect. The treatment that I've proposed is psychotherapy, and there were a couple that I went ahead and eliminated because I didn't think they would be good specifically for Oliver. The first is that prolonged exposure therapy is something that Oliver doesn't need, for sure. He is at the point where most of this doesn't really faze him anymore. He's used to it. It doesn't bother him that much, and he's just accustomed to it. The second thing is that I actually like a lot of aspects of trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy. And the main reason with this one is that I feel like it will allow him to have someone to talk to and someone to listen to him, and also really focus on what he can do with his life now rather than what's happened to him in the past. And the other thing is, part of this is I'm just a big dog person, but I also think a psychiatric service dog would be super helpful for him. he really does need that connection and someone who he can trust and someone who's going to stick by his side, and dogs already do that. But one that's trained to really help him understand his own emotions as well as how he can be his best self and recover, I think is going to be huge for him. It's hard to say whether he would recover or not, just because he's extremely stubborn. And again, he's a fictional character and it's hard to read into all of, who he is and stuff. But I think over time he will recover. And I think part of it is because he does have a group of people that do form around him to support him and care for him. And I feel like that's exactly what people need when they've gone through something really hard.